discovery. The Dragon's Mirror. Beneath the yellow lattice windows of the captain's cabin, a rope twitched, snake-like, down to the rain-wet wharf. A man was climbing down, hand over hand, his dark clothes invisible against the great black bulk of the ship's stern. But dangling from his belt, catching fragments of moon, something heavy banged against his thigh. It spilled careless circles of light, like large silver coins along the quay. The moment his feet touched the ground, he belted away, on unsteady legs up the steep cobbled streets. His horse was waiting, with an impatient clatter of hooves, in a dark alleyway. A week later, Judith and Walter lay squeezed under the benches of Southwark Bear Pit in London. Hidden there, they could watch the sport for free, but Judith was not enjoying herself. "Can't we go now, brother? It is so cruel to the bear." "Oh, but they're bringing in the bull now. What horrors!" "Oh, Walter, look at the poor dog sent flying." Her brother drummed the toes of his boot on the floor ferociously. "'Tis no more than Francis Drake would do to the Spaniards if they try to take England." "If they have any wit at all, the Spaniards will stay home in Spain, where it's warm and doesn't blow gales in July," said Judith. The rain swirling down on the open arena gusted in under the roof, and she was thoroughly wet. "Now I can't see," complained Walter, as two sailors sat down on the bench above him. Brother and sister were showered with drips from the men's wet cloaks. One sailor was English, one swarthy and black-haired. "And why did you not take ship from Plymouth there and then?" said the Englishman. "From Plymouth? Faith, the place is all navy. The whole British fleet is coming and going, in and out, and not a foreign merchant ship in port. I must get over the channel, and before the Armada sets sail too. For I have a thing here, will take the heart out of the English, and put it into the hand of Spain to crush." Judith gripped Walter's arm, but he was already listening, wide-eyed. The foreign sailor opened a sackcloth bag. "See here, the magic mirror of Il Draco. Haven't you heard it said in Cadiz 1,000 times that the devil Drake used magic to find and sink the ships of Spain? A magic mirror? Well, I stole it from his cabin on the Revenge, and I mean to lay it at King Philip's feet. The luck of Francis Drake at the king's feet." The Englishman threw a corner of his cloak across the bag. "Put it hands, fool. Do you want to be torn to pieces? This rabble about us love Drake better than any man in England. Come, I'll show you a lugger bound for Holland. You can take a berth on that. From Amsterdam, you must make your way to Spain as best you can." The two men left the crowded bear pit. Judith and Walter wormed their way from under the bench, meaning to raise a hue and cry and go after and capture them. "So, thought you'd watch without paying, did you?" shouted the doorman. "Well, I'll teach you honesty when I get my hands on you." So the children ran, and didn't stop running until Judith pointed ahead at two dark figures hurrying through the rain. "It is them! We've caught up to them! Oh, Walter, we must get back that mirror!" And so they followed. Beside the river, head down against the driving rain, along Bankside, past Clink Prison, and over London Bridge. All the shine of the water was scuffed out by flurries of wind, and in the Pool of London, a row of moored boats rolled sickeningly on the current. Through a downpour as thick and dark as molasses, they saw the Spanish sailor call out to the captain of a Dutch merchant lugger. The captain shouted back, "Ya, ya, come aboard. I have few enough men want to put out in this weather." Judith put her hand on her brother's sleeve. "Take care, Walter. We don't know who's to be trusted here." So they crept aboard, and down into the pitch-black, stinking forecastle, and hid. Running feet drummed to and fro on the decks overhead, but not so loud as the beating of their hearts. They crouched there among hammocks, sailcloth, ropes, and casks of beer, until nightfall brought most of the crew below decks to sleep. An hour later, when there was no sound but the creak of timber and the snoring of sailors, Walter and Judith crept out of hiding. There lay the Spaniard, the sackcloth bag sticking out from under his coarse black hair. He moaned in his sleep as they eased the bag away from him, stole the mirror away from under him. But he did not stir, and no shout of anger pounced at them as they climbed the creaking ladder, raised the hatch, and wriggled out onto the deck. The only sound was a squeal of horror from Judith as she saw the muddy mouth of the Thames estuary slip away under the moonlight. The lugger had put to sea. "We must go to the captain and ask him to help. The Dutch are supposed to be friends to the English after all, aren't they?" Tumbling green-faced into the after cabin, Judith and Walter startled the captain. "What trouble?" Walter gabbled out their story. "Your pardon, sir, but we followed a spy aboard who stole Sir Francis Drake's own magic mirror. You must turn the ship and take us to Plymouth to give it back. For they do say the Spanish are making ready even now to invade England. Oh, and you must hang that Spanish trader from the yard arm." Whether or not the captain believed them, he laughed out loud at the idea of setting course for Plymouth. "I'll carry you to Amsterdam. You and your mirror can take ship from there where the devil you please. As for hanging one of my crew, they're flogged. I'd sooner hang two worthless stowaways. I will leave him on lookout at the masthead where he's useful to me. I care nothing for your filthy war. Stay here in this cabin and make no nuisance of yourselves, yeah?" But halfway to Amsterdam, the tedious rain turned to a full-blown southeasterly gale. It gripped the lugger and shook her, as though it would pluck out her masts. She was driven north like a fleck of spray on the wind, and the crew worked for their very lives to take in sail. The captain, a fiercely superstitious man, raged down the deck to his cabin and shook himself dry like a dog. "Devil take your Francis Drake. It is truth you told me. That mirror has stirred up this storm to drive us back to England. When was ever such filthy weather in July? Well, I will not fight it. I will run before the storm. What can I do else? And where we strike the English coast, I will put you ashore, and your devilish mirror, and hang that Spaniard too for the bad luck he has brought me." Many savage hours drove the lugger north. As they sighted land, an orange fire was plainly visible on the crest of a craggy hill. The captain mistook it at first for the harbour light. If only he had understood that signal, that orange beacon burning itself to ashes high above the sea, then he would have known that the Spanish war fleet had already been sighted. England and Spain were already at war. Battle was joined in the English Channel, and neither magic mirrors nor luck could settle the matter now. Only the skill of sea captains and the blood of fighting sailors. The lugger put in at a small fishing port watched over by a ruined cliff-top abbey. For the long journey overland, the captain loaned Judith and Walter his second mate, for he had come to believe that his own good luck depended on the safe delivery of their treasure. The mate hired 2 horses, and they took the southwest road as fast as the beast would stagger along muddy roads. Watching them go, from the deck of the lugger, the Dutchman gave orders for the Spanish sailor to be seized and shut up below decks. But though he was looked for, he was nowhere to be found. "Escaped? Devils! He has gone after them to get back that mirror. Those children will need all of Drake's luck if they're ever to reach Plymouth alive." Judith clung tight to the second mate, her arms clasped round his waist. She had only ever ridden the big old dray horses at her father's brewery. Walter clung to his saddle in grim terror. Although he had learned to ride, horses never raised a gallop in London's crowded streets. Now they careered along the riverside road out of town, along the wild moor-top bridgeway, and across a wilderness of streams and rivers. The horses needed rest and water by midday, and they stopped where a tall, plank-built watermill beat a river into a thunder of foam. A little orchard alongside the mill gave them a lunch of unripe apples. And in among the trees, they found rows of wooden sheds with throbbing, humming beehives inside. Judith stepped out of the saddle to see if she could steal a honeycomb or two. The horses stood by the mill pool, sucking up water greedily. As Walter slouched in the saddle, munching on a sour apple, he drew the mirror out of his saddlebag and looked down into its circle of brass. There in the reflection was his own face, the blue sky, an iron pulley, and the high platform in the mill's side. On the platform was a sack of grain, and crouched beside it was the Spaniard from the lugger, pushing his shoulder against the sack. "Look out!" cried Walter. But the words were snatched from his lips by the roaring water and the deep grinding of the mill. Shoved from the platform, the heavy sack fell like a hanged man from the scaffold. It struck the second mate clean out of the saddle. One moment he was there, and the next he was gone. Over the ducked head of his horse and into the shiny mill race. The current pulled him into the wheel, and not a glove, nor boot, nor scrap of cloak broke the surface again. For all Walter stared and stared, with eyes that had forgotten how to blink. Agile as a cat, the sailor dropped down between the horses. He made a grab for the reins of Walter's mare. Though the sound was drowned out by the rushing water, his lips mouthed the words, "That mirror, boy." All of a sudden, a solid oozing brick of trickling yellow struck the sailor high up on the chest. He gave a cry of surprise and clawed it free from where it stuck. It left him with his hands full of honey. Judith, who had flung the honeycomb at him, kicked over now a whole row of beehives. She was mounted on the Spaniard's own horse, for she'd spotted it, tied out of sight in the orchard, a moment before she witnessed the murder of the second mate. The unhoused angry bees chased the scent of their stolen honey across the grass to the hands and throat of the sticky murderer. The air round his head swarmed yellow, and the horses were set leaping and prancing too, their ears full of bees. Walter's mare and the riderless horse bolted through the orchard. The Spaniard was left to chase them on foot, but the bees raging around his head and hands drove him back to shelter in the mill pool. Side by side, clinging to their saddles, Judith and Walter rode where their horses took them. "The poor mate! We must go back and look for him." "He's gone, Walter. He's drowned," panted Judith. "And shrew me if we go back. We'll go where it's safe." So they rode towards the square, dark shape on the horizon, the silhouette of some huge church minster. Overhead, sunset stained the sky like a pool of blood. The night watchman's dog came sniffing round them as they clopped wearily into the city. The night watchman peered at them suspiciously. "Here for the fair, be they?" Walter began to explain, but Judith quickly silenced him. Yes, we're here for the fair, master." For she did not know who would come after them asking questions. "We'll sleep in the big church," she told her brother firmly. And it seemed a good idea, for what harm can come to a person in a church where men may not wear their swords? But it was a gloomy place, full of dark echoes and booming shadows, sleeping stone figures and looming pillars rising up into pitch blackness. A single red flame burned beside the altar. Something brittle crunched under Walter's boot. The children were exhausted. Otherwise they could never have slept for thinking about that drowned man in the mill race, and all those other dead people lying beneath them in the floor of the minster. A cold draught blew in through one long open window and out of another, swirling around the great bare floor of the nave. In the morning, the sun woke them, shining in through towering panels of stained glass. There was a sharp, hot smell. A glass worker had lit a brazier and was blowing it to a red heat with bellows. All around him were squandered fragments of coloured glass and strips of lead, and he was cursing the night visitor who had trodden on one of his precious diamonds of glass. So Walter and Judith did not dare come out from their hiding place in the chantry. People began to come into church, kneeling to pray on the hard floor. At last the glazier laid aside his tools and went for breakfast. Judith and Walter, on their way towards the door, stopped to admire the mosaic of stained glass and lead. As they turned away, there was a clatter of metal. The Spanish sailor stood in front of them, holding a red-hot soldering iron from the brazier.
"Ye forth, mirror, and I'll maybe spare your lives."
His long hair hung loose round his unshaven, triumphant face. The tip of the soldering iron cut smoking figures in the air as it came closer and closer to Judith's face. Busy with their prayers, none of the worshippers looked up or rose from their knees. But they scattered when Walter shouted at the top of his voice, "Leper! Leper! Leper shouldn't come inside the church!" People jumped up from their prayers. "Leper? Who's a leper? Get him out! Get him out! Abort! Away!" In all the panic, Walter and Judith fled. Outside the minster, the city was transformed. Silence and night had given way to the noise of rattling carts, milling people and shouting peddlers. Hastily built stores were selling toys, caged birds, baskets, brushes and beer, geese, hares and vegetables, cheeses and rope. Morris dancers were jigging and hopping to the music of bagpipes and tabor. Every moment expecting the searing touch of the soldering iron, Walter screamed as he felt a blow on his shoulder. But it was only the Morris dancers' buffoon, running here and there, blipping heads with a bladder. People were laughing fit to split their coats, but Walter could not find it in him to laugh. His horse was still tied outside the minster. His saddlebags banged against his shins as he ran. It seemed to him that things were just about as bad as they could be. He was wrong.